Welcome to the Trent England Show this Monday. Welcome to another week of great programs. Although I'm going to be gone at the end of the week, so we'll be a couple of shows short this week. But we've got a good one lined up for you right now, and I'm going to get to an op-ed that David Boren had in the Oklahoman over the weekend. But first, I just have to, and we're doing it old school today. I clipped them out of the paper. I didn't need to bring my computer because I've got it all in hard copy here. Starbucks is considering turning their stores into homeless shelters. Did you see this story? Starbucks is tentatively, I don't know if this is real, to be perfectly honest, but they say they're going to open their public restrooms to anybody. You don't have to be a customer, anybody. What are they doing? They're trying to appease the unappeasables. They're trying to appease people who hate Starbucks because Starbucks is a big, successful business. It used to be a small business. It used to be just an idea that some entrepreneurs had, and then a small business, and then it became successful and became a statewide and a regional business, and then a national business, and then a global. Anyhow, you know the story, right? But this actually makes more sense than you might think, because the only way to appease the folks who want to take down Starbucks is to shrink the company. And look, if they're going to turn their stores into homeless shelters, they're going to lose a lot of business, and they might wind up being just a little, coffee shop outside of Pike Place Market in Seattle, and then I guess everybody would be happy. Okay, Fox 25 was over on the OCPA campus just a little while ago. I was out talking with them at our Ten Commandments monument because you may have seen the legislature passed, the governor signed legislation that says that the Ten Commandments, as well as other historical documents, things like the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Magna Carta, that these things can be displayed on public property in Oklahoma as long as they are part of a display of historical documents. It's an attempt to legislate common sense, which is sort of hard to do, but we'll see. Fox 25 was out because they wanted to talk about whether the Ten Commandments monument is going to move from OCPA's grounds here at the corner of 13th and Lincoln back 10 blocks north to the state capitol. We'll see. I don't know whether that's going to happen or not, but it sent me back to the Oklahoma and Indian Territory Constitutional Convention documents. I just wanted to confirm something that I was pretty sure I had read before. Lo and behold, I had in fact read right at the beginning. You know, the first thing you could guess, if you don't know this already, what was the first thing that they did at the Oklahoma and Indian Territory Constitutional Convention? The first thing that they did when they assembled was they prayed. They had, this is back when people knew how to pray. They had a long Christian, non-sectarian prayer. The people who wrote the Oklahoma Constitution, and it was the Oklahoma Constitution that the Oklahoma Supreme Court said was violated by having the Ten Commandments on state property up at the state capitol. And, look, it just goes to show how absurd these debates all are. And this is what I told Fox 25. Look, you may think it's great that the Ten Commandments is on state property or maybe back on state property. You may think it's lousy. But it's not a constitutional issue, because it is, for sure, with no question about it, first of all, historical, related to Oklahoma's actual history and America's actual history. There's just no question about that, right? The ideas, if you go through the Oklahoma Constitution, the Oklahoma Bill of Rights, right, the ideas that are there flowed out of ideas that come in part from our Judeo-Christian heritage. There's just no question about that. Anybody who questions that, is not a serious person, or they're painfully ignorant, and we should pity them, right? There's no question that this is a part of our history. There's also no question, here's what's a little bit more controversial, there is no question that our law does not prohibit government from recognizing, not in the sense of endorsing, but in the sense of the simple sense of recognizing religion, and recognizing that religion is actually important to civil society. Did you know that that was okay? We have had this 50 plus, maybe 60 now year period in American history where we have had this drummed out of our minds, this simple common sense fact that religious belief, and some kinds of religious belief more than others, are good for civil society. They're good for the rule of law. Don't take my word for it. Well, you could take my word for it. You can also seek out your own common sense, God-given common sense. But we could also look back to George Washington, except that the fellow who wants to be our guide to George Washington, David Boren, who had a column quoting George Washington in the Oklahoman on, was this on Sunday? Yes, on Sunday, yesterday. David Boren had this column quoting George Washington, not misquoting George Washington, but misconstruing George Washington, trying to mislead us about what George Washington was saying. What does David Boren write? He starts this column saying, when George Washington delivered his farewell address, it's kind of a funny thing to say. I mean, George Washington delivered it in the sense that it was a piece of paper. He never gave it as a speech. It was a piece of paper that was delivered to Congress. When George Washington delivered his farewell address, he encouraged the leaders of our young nation to, quote, follow this quote. This should, if you're good with your biblical exegesis here, this will ring a bell for you. To, quote, promote then as an object of primary importance institutions for the general diffusion of knowledge, ellipsis, it is essential that public opinion should be enlightened. Now, the big question, the bell that this rings for me is, wait a second, there's a word in there. It's kind of like in the Bible when you get the word therefore, right? What's the therefore? I've had multiple pastors present that question as part of a sermon. And here we have a word that's sort of like therefore. We have at the beginning of this quote, promote then as an object of primary importance. Well, promote why? So George Washington is sort of summing up a big idea that he has just written about in his farewell address. And he says, so therefore we need education. Well, what's the therefore? What's the then therefore? David Boren doesn't tell us, and he doesn't tell us because he doesn't want us to know. How do I know he doesn't want us to know? Well, I know what George Washington says. And it would be an inconvenient truth for David Boren. Let's look at what George Washington says. I can pull it up on the screen courtesy of a great website called Teaching American History. And I have it here thanks to a great volume from Liberty Fund Books. I'm giving credit where credit is due. What does George Washington say right before he writes that statement? He talks about, this is so awkward, he talks about, well, here's what he says. We've got that quote up there. Let's go above that quote. He says, of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, he's not talking about getting rich, by the way. He's talking about political prosperity in the sense of actually building a successful republic. He says, religion and morality are indispensable supports. I'm going to go on with this because it's George Washington. It's the farewell address. It's important, and it is important if we want to understand why David Boren is more than a little bit off in this column that he put into the Oklahoman yesterday. Religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, the firmest props of the duties of men and citizens. I could go on. It goes on for another paragraph there. What is George Washington? And then George Washington says, promote then. Right? We could go back to David Boren's column. George Washington then says, promote then as an object of primary importance institutions for the general diffusion of knowledge. It is essential that public opinion should be enlightened. We need knowledge and enlightenment because we need religion and morality. Now look, I understand there are a lot of people who disagree with this today. David Boren clearly disagrees with this today. I have no doubt because you just look at the way he runs a modern university, and it is not about religion. It is not about morality. It's a kind of a Club Med financed by debt and public subsidies, right? I mean, with the side effects, the only side effects that they really talk about are, it's supposed to make us wealthier. What does Boren say in this column? This is the kind of claptrap that we let just roll over our ears from the people who suppose that they are our betters because they draw six-figure salaries from large institutions that claim to be about higher learning. What does David Boren say here? He says, Washington and other founding fathers, such as Thomas Jefferson, envisioned a system of public education not only as a means for economic growth, but more importantly to create an informed and engaged citizenry who would preserve and strengthen our fledgling democracy. Again, this is half right. It is totally wrong to suggest that men like Jefferson and Washington wanted to start universities for anything like the primary purpose of getting rich. I mean, they recognized if you're smarter, right, you're going to have more commercial success. I mean, that's sort of common sense, right? But the purpose of having a university, I mean, actually in the 1790s, for at least part of the time in the 1790s, right? Basically, once we recovered from the American Revolution, we had some boom times in a lot of parts of the young United States of America, right? And it wasn't that everybody had gone to university, everybody got a degree. It was that people just worked really hard. People had good ethics and morals and, yes, religion that encouraged them to build communities of people who worked really hard and were industrious and therefore were able to better their lot in life and their children even more so, right? They didn't want to create universities so that they could get even more rich. They wanted to create universities so that they could create statesmen. What does David Boren go on to say? He actually lays the seed of understanding why his argument is not just a little off. He's not just misconstruing George Washington. He's not just misleading the public. He's actually, in a certain fundamental way, just dead wrong, and dangerously so. Here's what he says next in this column, the second paragraph. He says, "It wouldn't be until the 1840s, under the leadership of education reformer Horace Mann, that a structured system of public education was established in the United States. Mann believed public schools must serve as, quote, the great equalizer for children from all economic backgrounds." This is not, I mean, again, these are the kind of things, people read this, it sort of sounds good. He throws out Jefferson, he throws out Washington, right? He's quoting some people. This is put together, probably by some PR firm or some PR person at OU. It's put together well. It sounds great. It's totally wrong and totally misleading about the history that it's supposed to be about. Jefferson and Washington wanted universities to create statesmen, not so that everybody could be equalized, because they understood, frankly, that not everybody is fit to be a statesman. Not everybody is fit to be an entrepreneur. Not everybody's fit to be a mommy, right? Not everybody's fit to be a daddy. Not everybody's fit for everything. You cannot, I've said this before on the show, and I'm going to say it again, you cannot be whatever you want to be. I'm sorry. Washington, Jefferson, they understood that what the nation needed was, yes, people who were literate, people who had a base of education, right? They did believe in things like literacy and having a common reading that any educated person would be exposed to, what people today might call the Western canon, right? Things like Shakespeare and Aristotle and things like that any educated person should have some access to, right? Should have some knowledge of. But they also believed that the purpose of a university was to churn out good citizen leaders. Horace Mann had a different vision, right? Horace Mann had a different vision 2 generations after the American founding. And his vision of education and his vision of the university was not the same, right? And what's fascinating to me about what David Boren says is he wants to quote from whom? He wants to quote from Washington. He wants to quote from Jefferson. Washington did not have a university education. Washington had a real-world education. Washington was one of the first American explorers of what at that time was the Wild West, right? Washington got his education by actually serving in the military and doing very practical things. Jefferson, obviously, had a more formal education, right? But neither one of them was educated in anything like the Horace Mann model or the David Boren model. Neither of them were brought up to be coddled, brought up to be convinced that everybody should just have good self-esteem and can be whatever they want to be. No, they were brought up with the idea that if they had great blessings in their life, whether the blessing of good character or the blessing of inherited wealth, both of them had some of each. Although both of them had elements of their character that they had to struggle with, and both of them, neither of them was at the highest level of social stratum. But they didn't come from that kind of an educational background, right? And what's fascinating is David Boren actually says, well, things really got good once we started systematizing, building a system, once we started spending money, once politicians took control over it, once we decided it wasn't going to be about developing some great statesman, but it was just going to be a factory that pretended like all human beings are just the same in all of their faculties and anybody could just be whatever. And look, that's a different, you might agree with that model. David Boren might agree with that model. But he doesn't start his column with Horace Mann because not very many people know who Horace Mann is. He starts his column with people who were educated before that model ever existed in the United States of America. He starts his column quoting people who probably couldn't have come out of a system like that, which I think is fascinating. And of course, he doesn't even really quote them accurately. At least he doesn't give us the context to understand what it was Washington was really saying. The other canard he throws in here is, I'll just throw this out because I hate this so much. He says in here, each of us who cares about public education must be engaged in supporting. In other words, the argument, I mean, this is, I don't know, is there even a logical fallacy for something so pathetic as this? I just think this is the most pathetic. Yeah, and look, some conservatives try to use these kind of arguments too, and it's equally as pathetic. Well, yeah, I'm right because I care more than other people. Well, I don't know. It's easy to care when you've got a big salary and they provide you a mansion to live in, I guess. Well, I don't know. I could go on with this. We'll post it in the links. It is worth reading only to remind ourselves how important it is to actually understand history so that we can spot fallacious arguments like what David Boren was peddling in the Oklahoma newspaper yesterday. Look, is education important? Yes. Education is so important that we should not turn it all over to politicians. Education is so important that we should actually care about asking the tough questions about what the product of education supposedly is at the University of Oklahoma, at OSU, at Rose State, at wherever. Right? If we, the taxpayers, are subsidizing it, and especially if we are subsidizing it and then encouraging other people to take on debt because they supposedly are going to get some benefit from it, we should always ask the hard questions about it. And if we find that it fails the test of George Washington, if we find that it doesn't actually produce great citizens, great leaders, great statesmen, then we should figure out what has gone wrong and we should change how we do it. I'm Trent England. Thanks for watching the show. You can find us on SoundCloud, Stitcher, iTunes, Facebook, well, where else are we? YouTube, of course. And as always, you can find the whole show archive at ocpathink.org. Just go over to the little projects tab and you can find the Trent England Show on the projects tab at our brand new website, ocpathink.org. All of it updated. We've tried to make it even easier for you to find whatever you want on that website. So ocpathink.org. I'm Trent England. Thanks for watching.